p.m. on Monday, May the 5th. We're going to open our Impact Fee Advisory Committee meeting. Are you our presenter, I'm guessing?
I am the presenter.
Step right up. Oh, I guess, wait a second, I'm sorry. We have to approve minutes.
Okay.
Deliberate and act on approval of the regular meeting minutes of September 9th, 2024. I was not here, Warren wasn't here. I guess, Kim, you ran the meeting?
Mm-hmm.
Did you have fun?
I don't have a whole lot of recollection of it, actually.
September of last year?
I mean, I don't see anything in the minutes that's a.
Because you weren't here? Yeah, me either. Well,
I'll make a motion to approve it.
Thank you. We have a motion to approve, and do we have a second?
I was here. I'll second.
Great. A motion and a second to approve the minutes.
Kim motion.
All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Okay, next is Water and Wastewater Impact Fee Update and Project Timeline, presentation and discussion by Freese and Nichols. You're on.
Very good.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
Do we have the presentation?
Yeah, can you pull that up?
Do we have a
Do you have a pointer?
Yeah.
She can change it herself.
clicker, or do you want me just to?
Right here.
To go over the water and wastewater update for the impact fees. We'll go over, if you want to jump to the next slide, that's our agenda. I'll give just a brief kind of review of what we discussed in the last meeting, talk about the capital improvements plan, go over the impact fee calculations, and then, like I said, kind of finish up with the next steps and project timeline. So just some basics for those that weren't here, for those that remember the last meeting. Impact fees are a one-time charge assessed to new development for the cost of anything associated with new or expanded infrastructure. So again, impact fees cannot be used for any kind of maintenance or operational costs. It all has to be for increasing capacity of the system. Impact fees are developed based on Chapter 395 of the Texas Local Government Code. So those rules dictate kind of how we do this whole process as far as the calculations and with the public noticing. And then by law, it is limited to water, wastewater, roadway, and stormwater or drainage infrastructure. But we are only looking at water and wastewater as part of the study. And then here's just kind of an overview of the impact fee process. The first step there is developing land use assumptions. That's what we discussed in that first meeting back in September, where we establish our existing customer base, estimate our growth over the next 10 years, and then use that to determine our water demands and wastewater flow projections. And these next two steps, the capital improvements plan and the impact fee calculations, that's what we're going to get into in a little bit more detail tonight. But that's where we utilize those land use assumptions to determine what projects are needed to accommodate the growth in the water and wastewater system over the next 10 years. And then for the impact fee calculations, we look at how utilized each of those projects are on the CIP. determine our living unit equivalents, and then calculate what's called the maximum allowable impact fee. So that's kind of all the technical part of the process. And then the last two steps are some stakeholder meetings. So we've had various meetings with city staff to go over projections and CIP. We have these two advisory committee meetings. This is our second one tonight, and then we will do a council presentation as well. We have a public hearing where we have to notice for 30 days, and then we'll have 2 readings of the ordinance to get everything updated. That's the process. And then reminder of your role as the Impact Fee Advisory Committee. It's really just to oversee the development of impact fees. That's why we're here presenting. You can review the preparation of our land use assumptions, capital improvements plan, and ultimately provide written comments to council. Those are due at least 5 days before the public hearing. So we can kind of track all the comments tonight, and then that will be submitted. And then moving forward, there is a requirement to file a semi-annual report on the progress of the CIP. So any questions on background basics before we jump into CIP? Okay. I'll just buzz through this one. Yeah. So getting into the capital improvements plan on the water system, we really evaluate kind of these 4 components when we determine what improvements are needed for the water system. Production capacity, so that's the amount of treated water we have available to meet those customer demands under peak conditions. There's also pumping capacity, so that's the facilities that basically add energy to the water to get it out to all the customers. Storage, so that's stored water that we use for peak demands or emergencies, so that's ground storage or those elevated storage tanks. And then pipeline capacity, which is just the conveyance network to deliver water to all the customers. So looking at Rockport system, really we're good on production capacity, pumping capacity, and storage capacity. So you'll see all of our projects are really kind of fall under that pipeline capacity component. And this next slide shows a map of our improvements. It's a little hard to see on the screen here with the colors, but all of like the black lines and kind of those gray facilities, those are the existing components of the water system. And then what should be kind of a red color, those bolder projects are all the pipeline projects that we have identified, and they're numbered 1 through 9. So we have 9 pipeline projects kind of scattered throughout the service area, really to extend water service and to upsize some bottlenecks in the system. So we can go to the next one. We'll list all the projects. Oh, we'll get to wastewater, and then we'll go to the list of projects. So on the wastewater side, again, kind of looked at 3 components to determine what projects are needed. Treatment capacity, similar to production capacity, the ability to treat and discharge wastewater flows. Lift station capacity, that's when we collect wastewater at a pumping facility at a lower elevation, pump it up to a higher elevation before it can get to the treatment plant. And then again, pipeline capacity, so that conveyance network that gets the water from, or gets the wastewater from the customers to the treatment plant during peak flow conditions. So you're good on treatment capacity, and you'll see our projects here that we identified are lift stations and pipelines. So again, similar map on the wastewater side. This is the existing system. Everything in kind of the black and gray color are existing facilities and lines, and then everything that's recommended or proposed is in red. So you can see we have 3 pipeline projects, 3 new lift stations, and 2 lift station expansions that are all needed to serve that growth over the next 10 years. And really kind of the major project is a large interceptor line kind of running along the bypass there that is meant to kind of collect all of the wastewater kind of throughout that service area. So you can avoid these little lift stations that all kind of get built and are hard to maintain. So we did recommend this more regional type project to accommodate all of the growth in this area. So that's the major project, but there's a couple lift stations too. Yes, sir.
Based on the way these are numbered, I'm assuming these are ranked in order of
generally in
preference?
priority. Yes, for both the water and the wastewater system. We tried to look at where some of those impending developments are and where the projects might happen sooner. Again, some of that development could change over the next 10 years. But we did look at, if something needs to happen upstream before the downstream project happens, we did order them in that way too.
How many lift stations do we have now?
52,
Yeah, I was gonna say.
which this will take away. I believe the new regional one will help do
Yes.
away with a couple of them.
Yes, I think we identified 3 or 4 that could go away with these projects. And then as some of the development starts happening, because we didn't identify kind of extensions to the specific developments, as those gravity lines come in, you could start to take off some of them depending on where all of that development kind of
So if you
starts to
locate these
infill.
in these areas, then some of those that are lift stations now can go to gravity,
Right.
is the plan. And eliminate some of those.
Mhm.
A lot.
Yeah, lift
Yeah.
stations are,
When you don't have the lines for them to use gravity, you don't have a choice.
yeah,
It's really hard when you don't have a lot of elevation change to use the gravity to get the
Right.
wastewater flow. So you're just real flat, and when you're
Well,
putting in
before, I
little
think we were
developments, it's
limited on
hard.
a 14-foot depth. But we're not limited to the 14-foot anymore. We can go as deep as we can go.
really?
So that changes things, and that helps tremendously.
There's a little bit of kind of considerations when it comes to maintenance with how deep you go, and then initial construction cost. But we limited that line, I think, to 30 feet
I
deep.
think 30 is what we.
Which is still a fairly deep line, but it does kind of get away from having all these individual lift stations for every development that comes in.
That's way underwater.
It's a height. Yeah, there's a lot of work that goes into it, but
Would have to be, yeah.
if we can get those depths, then we can do away with it.
That'd be great. I'm sorry, thank
No,
you.
yes, great questions. Anything else on the CIP for water or wastewater?
I know you had in your original, for the supply for the water, that production capacity was fine. I mean, looking at, we're coming into a historic drought again, where Sandpat is limited on capacity. How are we seeing that reliance still with that and the other departments feeding off of that as well for a shared source? Have we looked at alternative supply?
We didn't look at water rights or water supply or wholesale contracts as part of this study. We really just looked at contracted capacity right now. But it is something to, I guess, continue to look at as you're doing more master planning of the system, to make sure that that's accounted for, and if those obligations change, or if something happens with the drought and water that is available. But there is no project identified in the impact fee CIP to account for that.
I don't know that impact fees could be used for that either, because I believe they have to be used in reference to development.
They could be supported if you had to do a project to acquire more supply or production capacity. If you had to put in another pipeline to get to a certain delivery point, we could include that. But just buying water rights typically isn't part of impact fees.
Did the possibility of the city annexing, I mean, I'm not saying we're done, but in 10 years, is that taken into consideration, or we're just working with what we got?
Yeah, we're working with what we got, because you know the rules are now that if you annex somewhere, every person in that area has to agree to be annexed. I don't know about you, but I don't see that ever happening.
It's not happening.
Unless they change the rules at some point.
Right.
Right.
Wow. Okay.
Our service area does go slightly outside of the city limits where you're already providing service, but we didn't look at kind of expanding that significantly, just looking at the, what we call the CCN.
Right, I thought you had a map that showed our CCN. It actually goes.
I think it was in the previous presentation. I don't know that we had it in this one, but we do have, to define the service area as part of the study. So you'll see that in the report. It was in our last presentation too, but it kind of considers both the water and wastewater CCN and the city limits, and kind of looks at where your existing customers are, so.
Okay.
Board, am I allowed to ask a question?
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it, and thank you for allowing me to attend via Zoom, traveling for business. My name is Matt Anderson, councilman for Ward 2, City of Rockport. I think I want to make sure I understand the gentleman's comment and question. I think that was very good about when we look at impact fees and we're looking at a 10-year window. If I'm understanding it correctly, the only water supply the City of Rockport currently has is San Pat purchasing it from Corpus Christi. We're purchasing it from San Pat. We have no ability, no wells, no treatment facility. If something happens in that supply chain line I just mentioned, we could be in a little bit of a pickle. Do we want to consider looking at alternative, not a replacement, but an alternative or supplementary way of acquiring water for the residents in the City of Rockport, be it a well with our own small treatment system or some other, and that should be allowed in the impact fee rules if we're just supplying for development and new development.
As a master planning engineer, yes, I would say you definitely want to look at that. That's kind of what I do every day is look at systems regardless of impact fees and what projects are needed from the various regulations. But for impact fees, it'd be really hard to count kind of a redundant supply and say that that's due to development since you already technically have the capacity there. So it would get a little fuzzy. I have seen some utilities have a policy on what that resilience looks like, and then we can kind of apply that and say X percent is needed over what the demand is for the existing customers and new customers. So you'd have to come up with a planning criteria and kind of apply it across the system and be pretty consistent with it in order to have that apply to impact fees if you're kind of going to go with a redundant supply. So if you have, 4 MGD that's contracted right now and our maximum day demand is only 3.5 MGD, you're not really quite hitting that. But if you wanted to add another well that was another MGD or something like that, that capacity would be hard to count because you're already kind of covered by what you have existing contracted from an impact fee standpoint. From just a straight utility planning, master planning your system, I think that is very good practice, and obviously we're very familiar with different drought conditions, emergencies, things go out, even the electric grid impacts how we get water to customers. So I think overall great plan. It may not be as easy to include in the actual impact fees if you already have the capacity in your system. Not to say it's impossible, it would just take, I think, some planning and consistency on how you apply that to make sure we're being fair to existing and new customers when it comes to impact fees.
Thank you.
All right, great questions. We'll jump into the actual calculations, and some of this might make a little more sense when we get into how we calculate the eligible project costs. So for the impact fees, we only include a portion of the project that's utilized in this 10-year window due to that growth. So we use a hydraulic model and some various planning criteria to determine the existing and future percent utilization for each of those projects that are identified on the CIP. We also apply a 50% credit as required by Chapter 395. This credit is intended to basically capture the portion of future utility rates that will be used to pay for capital improvements. So we don't want to double charge new customers impact fees and then charge those same customers in their future water rates to pay for those same improvements. So by default, you can use a 50% credit. You can do a more detailed calculation that looks at how your rates go towards capital improvements. But for this study, we did just take the 50% credit. And then that equation down at the bottom is the basic calculation for impact fees. So we have the impact fee per service unit is that impact fee CIP cost minus the credit, and then divided by our growth in service units. So we'll go over each of those components in a little more detail here. For the water costs, these are a lot of numbers and kind of small here to read, but you can see our 9 projects are listed there, all of those pipeline projects The first set of columns is the percent utilization. So we go through and identify any portion of a project that is serving existing customers, and we kind of discount that out of the impact fees. So again, we can't use the portion of a project that is serving any existing customers. It can only be for new customers. So that's what that 2025 percentage column is. Then we also look at how utilized the projects are in that 10-year window due to the growth that we've identified. And the difference between those two is that 10-year utilization, so that kind of highlighted column there. And then we have our capital costs for each project. We did include financing costs. Those are impact fee eligible costs associated with the project. So adding capital costs, financing costs, we get that total project cost. And that's what that percentage is then applied to get to the impact fee eligible cost, that last column. So for water, we're just over $14.3 million for this 10-year window for impact fees. So again, that's kind of the hard part about doing these calculations when you have any kind of redundancy, because we have to determine what the level of service is right now, and then say what capacity you're adding for the given project, and how much of that growth it's serving over the 10 years to get that percent utilization. Yes.
So, is the reason we're considering impact fees only because of new growth? Or I guess my question at a very basic level is, if we didn't add a single new residence in the future, would we still be looking for impact fees in as much as they can't be used for maintenance and what have you?
No.
In other words, are the impact fees just for growth?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, if that's the case, then why are we only, and maybe I'm getting the cart before the horse, why is it we're only proposing 50% of the impact fee covers the cost? Doesn't that leave the rest of the residents paying for new
No.
It doesn't?
No, the reason she does the 50%, like she said, because utility rates, utility funds pay for some of that, some of those projects, right? And so this new customer that's just paid an impact fee, now is going to also pay in the water rates and the sewer rates to cover that portion of the projects that are not for growth, that are for maintenance, that are for repairs, okay? So you don't want your new customers paying for all of that. So you only do the, am I wrong? That kind of?
I mean, there is a little bit of, I guess, subsidizing the growth, because we are doing the 50% credit, assuming that some portion of even the growth-related projects are in the CIP that the rates cover. If you didn't want to do that, or if the policy decision is that we don't want existing ratepayers to pay for any new growth-related projects, you could do that credit calculation that basically looks at how your rates are spent and paid for, and if they go towards any projects. Or if you include,
just skyrocket, wouldn't it?
right, yeah, so we'd be looking at the $49 million instead of the $14.3 million-ish. I will say that these projects, you can see those percentages are sized for something further than 10 years. So you can continue to collect impact fees even once a project is installed. If it still has capacity for future growth, you would still keep that on your impact fee CIP and kind of continue collecting impact fees until the capacity runs out of that line for growth. So this won't, just because you build a project during this impact fee program doesn't mean we take it off for the next update. We'll continue to assess it, and if there's still capacity for excess growth, we keep it on. But we are assuming that some portion of rates would go towards growth-related projects too in the future.
Does that make sense?
So I guess at some point you're going to tell us what this
She's getting
calculates
there.
out.
Yes, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and I mean, really all infrastructure either comes from the impact fees or from rates. So those are kind of the two, like that's the balance of where you set your impact fee at.
So right now, we're losing money, I take it.
Major. We haven't updated in 20 years.
Wow.
You're gonna see a scale in there that shows you what everybody else now, because they've been updating, is charging compared to what we charge. We're losing money handily. Not that I'm recommending that we charge the maximum rate. That's gonna be totally up to council, what they want to do. But there is a maximum they can charge. And it's a lot different than what we're charging now. But let her finish her presentation.
Sure.
And I think one of the benefits too of having the impact fees is allowing the city to do some of these projects. So you aren't always having to rely on the developer just to do their little piece. Like that's how the system kind of gets piecemeal together. You have a lot of lift stations because you don't have this more comprehensive plan that then everybody pays into and it works, you know, for the various developments. So yeah, hopefully it all kind of comes together so that the developers are also happy that you're doing the projects, they're paying their fair share, and existing residents also get the benefit of having new growth and new establishments and all of that. So
is 50% this kind of a standard?
So, I mean, that's in Chapter 395, that clause basically says you can do a credit analysis to determine how much of your rates are used for capital improvements, or if that information is available or you don't do that, you must discount by 50%. So most utilities that I've worked with do the 50% credit unless they know they want to charge something higher than the maximum allowable with the 50%. If there's that kind of policy or mentality of the community that we don't really want existing ratepayers to contribute to the growth-related projects, and we want that to that burden to be all within the impact fees around developers, that's when you would want to probably do that credit. I would say 5 to 10 years ago, most everyone was doing the 50% credit. And now how expensive infrastructure is in some of the communities that see high growth no matter what, they are electing to do some of those detailed credit analysis and go up to those higher fees that you'll kind of see on the benchmark chart too.
But I honestly believe, because it's been 20 years since or more that this has been updated, I don't think you want to do the full amount right now. You can come back, if the bill passes, you can come back after 3 years. Right now, you can come back every year. But there is a bill on the floor, or I don't know where it is, if it's in committee or is scheduled for hearings, I don't know, that is going to limit you that you cannot update your impact fees within 3 years. You have to wait 3 years to do that. And if that passes, then that will be the case. But it is going to be such a shock, even if council decides to do 50% of the maximum allowed. It's a big difference because of the length of time that's gone by without any updates. So I don't know that you'd want to do your full on this first update.
So if, just hypothetically, if we only built half as many new homes as versus projected, then you'd have to wait 3 years to adjust those rates to cover because your costs for the development, for the infrastructure, it's the same regardless of whether it's 1,700 homes or if it's only 800. And all of a sudden your cost per.
But
yeah,
I will say that's kind of the idea of how we calculate impact fees is on a per service unit basis. So if theoretically, if the growth slowed down, all of those percentages would also be lower, and then your eligible cost would be lower and your denominator would be lower. where there's some kind of relationship between that growth and the cost associated with the growth. So the upfront project would be the same cost, but what's impact fee eligible would go down. So you're kind of extending that cost over a longer time period, where your cost per service unit.
Worst case scenario, though, I can see the city be on the hook for all these costs.
For the projects?
Right, if you put in the capital cost right away and then don't collect impact fees as fast as you think you're going to.
This should be done with bonds, right?
Well, no, I guess you could combine bonds and impact fees, but you collect the impact fees and then do the project.
Okay.
That's the way I've always looked at it.
Okay, see,
You don't jump out there and do the project.
potentially pay cash
And
up
be in
front.
debt, right.
Okay, never mind,
Right.
I get it.
You collect those impact fees until you can get to the point that you can finance one of these projects, and then you do it. But that's just how they're calculated, is all the projects that need to be done. And as they get done, I assume that as they got done, they came off the CIP. Now, maybe not if there's still growth that can happen in that line, but I always thought that once they were done, they came off the list.
Yeah, we'd want to keep them on basically until that percentage gets to 100%. So we
Gotcha.
are able to recoup the full cost of the project
Okay, I
over, updates.
Tonight, utilization is
Yeah.
100%.
Right.
Might be an off question, a little bit, or off topic, but the TERS, with the way that is done, is there anything different that would
Yeah,
affect
there's-
the impact fees with that?
That has no bearing.
No
on
bearing,
impact fees, no.
We can go to the wastewater table and then
All right, go
let
to
the
wastewater.
suspense go so we can actually see the numbers. So similar table on the wastewater side, you can see our 7 projects here. Again, the same calculations were performed to determine that 10-year utilization. We apply that to the total project cost, and we get that impact fee eligible cost at the end of the table there. For wastewater, we're just over $14.6 million. I think we can probably jump to the next one. So the denominator of the equation, again, is our growth in living unit equivalents. If you remember from the first presentation we were here, we talked about our land use assumptions and identified some annual growth rates and identified the 10-year population growth of 3,527 people. For impact fees, we define a service unit as one dwelling unit, so that's how we get to these living unit equivalents. We did look at census data and saw that on average there's 2 people per dwelling unit in the city of Rockport. So we took that population growth divided by the 2 people per dwelling unit to get our growth in LUEs, or living unit equivalents, of 1764. The next slide are the actual calculations here. So you can see on the water side, we have that $14.3 million. We apply that 50% credit, divide by 1,764 growth in LUEs to get the maximum allowable impact fee on the water side of $4,056. Current impact fee, as Carrie mentioned, is $674 on the water side.
That's what I'm saying.
And then very similar numbers on the wastewater side, that 14.6. Again, take that 50% credit divided by our growth in LUEs, we're at $41.50 for the maximum allowable fee on wastewater. And the current impact fee on that side is only $426. So yeah, you can see very significant increase, really due to capital costs and the projects that are on the CIP now. I think the next slide is that comparison, yeah.
And I'm gonna be honest with you, I would love to see council approve the full maximum allowed, because these projects are not gonna get done if we don't do something. But they could go 50%. I mean, they don't have to approve this maximum amount.
Right, yeah, that's kind of the ceiling. So as the terminology implies, it's the maximum allowable, but the actual assessed fee can be anything up to that maximum allowable. That's just
Well, I think
policy
that will
decision.
slow down some of the growth. It very well could.
That maximum allowable, of course, is based on the current calculations, though. And so if we had to recalculate at any point in time for the study based on perceived anticipated new growth in the CIP,
Right.
the maximum allowable can go higher.
Or lower,
Or
yeah.
lower.
or lower.
If we come back next year to regroup and change the CIP projects, that number's gonna change. So,
In theory, it wouldn't change significantly unless
that
you had some
much.
huge changes to your CIP. If you came back and said, we're actually gonna, not buy water from St. anymore, we're gonna build our own treatment plant. That would be a very significant change to the CIP that would cause some differences. If it's, oh, this line didn't go in because this development didn't happen, but there's one up here instead, those would kind of even out, or if the development slowed or sped up a little bit, those percentages would then change and your eligible costs would change. So those were not exactly a linear relationship, but it would likely track similarly.
yeah, I don't think the change would be significant.
Right, I'm not saying it would within a year or two, I'm just
Yeah.
saying within that 10 years, margin that we're talking about, if we all of a sudden had a mass, exodus here for development, and we started to see more developments pop up along the bypass, and the city's absorbing those, and, we absorb another 10 to 15,000 residents in the space of 10 years, which is beyond feasible, that would of course change this. So I don't see a reason why council wouldn't want to push towards that or part of that from a projection standpoint.
And you're gonna make a recommendation on what you think council should do, so.
By law right now, you are supposed to update every 5 years. As Carrie mentioned, there is a new bill in the House and the Senate that have varying language, but would still require a 5-year update, but it's making it a little bit harder for cities to do that, so you wouldn't be able to increase it. I think I forget if it was House or Senate, is 5 years or 3 years, so they're wanting to space out those increases. And there's some different requirements as far as a financial audit, some other things that would go along with an impact fee study if that gets passed. So we are tracking that, which may change the process a little bit for next time.
Right.
But even if it goes through, you would still, at the very least, would have to reassess within 5 years to say, has anything changed? Do we need to update? If not, then you have to make a motion that nothing has changed, or you do an update at that point. Okay, this is the benchmark. It's hard to read some of those cities. It's kind of right, at least what I can see. Oh, there we go. So you can see kind of a big range. Rockport existing rates are at the very bottom of that at 1,100 combined water wastewater. Ingleside is right there next at about 2,000. Some various cities point out Portland. The city of Portland has a tiered structure where their tier 1 is that 4,270, and then they have a tier 2, which is just over 8,500. So depending on where that development is happening, they have kind of 2 different zones that they charge impact fees. But you can see the range. Tried to point out with those green arrows the current impact fee for the city, and then the maximum allowable at 8,200. And then just to show that big range, we pulled some cities, a few in central Texas that we know of. New Braunfels Utilities is on the high end. They're charging over $25,000 for combined impact fees. There's a few in the state that are up in that range, but most of them are probably, kind of more in that middle range.
So the tiered system would let you
Be lower in one area but higher in another.
and I'm just, this proposed thing on Market Street, that could be one tier. I mean, regardless, I understand we're at the low end right now, but if you add another $5,000 or $10,000 to what we're trying to call a low income or affordable house,
Exactly.
it's huge.
Yes, that would add to the cost, definitely. Well, that's something to think about.
That's like 3%.
Yeah, the tiers, that may be a good way to look at it.
Very suspect that we're half of the next
Right?
lowest.
For the existing,
I'm sorry.
the current 1,100 is half of the next.
Yeah.
The next one is 2,000.
But look at these updates. Ingleside updated in 2020. I know because I did it. And they need to get in there and do another update. But Portland did it in 2022 and did the tiers, and I'd really like to look into that.
Yeah,
How we
their
can do that.
tiers, basically kind of in their existing system have that lower rate, that's tier 1, and then they have a bigger service area where there's very little infrastructure, and that's tier 2 because it's more expensive to extend service out. For that, you can do zoned impact fees a little bit, like a couple different ways. You could actually charge different maximum allowable and only include projects in those zones to really calculate that. Or if you just wanted to carve out certain kind of incentivized areas and you keep everything below the total maximum allowable but have different kind of places that you charge differently, then that is an
I'd
easier
really like to look
calculation.
into that.
Yeah.
For our next project.
Mhm.
So,
To kind of, yeah, identify where we want, I don't know.
no,
All
'cause
righty.
There's no movement back
Oh,
there.
I was gonna say, are we out of time?
Because I forgot to bring tacos, so the ghost is in
Yeah.
there. So yes, I mean, I'd really like to get together and discuss that.
Yeah.
That's-
Especially if there's, comments towards that, or if council doesn't feel comfortable, raising that up, or has different areas of where they want those impact fees to go, I think that
And
could make sense.
could you base the tier 1 lesser impact fee on if it is actually attainable housing project?
I have seen cities that have areas designated for affordable housing, and it tends to work better when that's already a policy for something else within the city that you can kind of point to. But you could certainly do it just for impact fees and kind of identify what that boundary is for the study when we do it.
The challenge with that is how many times we've seen developments, heard
Claim to be.
hearings claiming that
And
it's
then
gonna
they
be
don't.
affordable housing, and it does not materialize that way.
Exactly.
Oh, they're only $400,000 homes. That's very affordable.
400, I know, the one
That's
developer
affordable in
said,
Westlake.
they're only 425, they're very attainable. It's good for you.
I think all of us went, yeah.
Yeah.
If
So,
you do
am
have the zoned impact fees, it does limit where you can spend the fees. You kind of have to keep separate accounting for those. So if you collect impact fees in one zone, you can only spend it in projects for that zone, or that are identified in that zone's CIP, basically.
This is over and above water and sewer tap fee, right?
Oh, yes.
So I come in and buy a permit, pay for water tap, sewer tap, live in New Braunfels, I'm gonna write a check up front for $25,000.
Before they'll let you have those water taps and sewer taps, but you have to pay additional. Yeah.
In there, that's
And they're going
2023.
nuts in New Braunfels right now.
Oh, yeah, they're busy as all get out,
As are we.
yeah, but they're getting off.
Well, we should be
Yeah.
$1,000 up.
Oh, yeah. Anyway, go ahead, sorry.
Nope, I think that's the end,
Discussion.
just the schedule. So yeah, if there's any other questions or thoughts, or I guess any official kind of comments that you want to track here as part of the submittal to council.
We have the recording, so we have to give a report to council on our discussion tonight. So I'm gonna ask each of you to email me your thoughts on how you wanna move forward, on how you wanna see council move forward.
Including the tiered system?
Well, that'll be a discussion for another time. No, I think this is just based on what we're doing now. On the current impact fee update. I think we wanna do a workshop as the advisory committee for impact fees and talk about the tiered system. Definitely. Like she said, if you do a tiered system, you have to, keep them separate, in separate accounts, and then the monies that are collected in tier 1 can only be used for projects in tier 1. So that's something I wanna get together with Stephanie and talk about.
So what's the comment you're wanting from us now?
Basically, tell me how you feel about this update, and do you recommend for the council go the full raise, 50% of the maximum? What do you think they should do?
We will have a report too. If you go to the next one, it'll show some dates here. So we've done our 2 advisory committee meetings after tonight. We're gonna submit our impact fee report, so you'll have a chance to review that. You can send that along beginning of June. And then we are slated to go to council to consider setting the public hearing date on June 20th is where we'll just have that resolution. And then setting the public hearing for July 22nd. So that puts your written comments due to council on or before July 14th. So you'll have a little bit of time to see the report. If there needs to be additional discussion or emails to capture those, they just need to go to council before 5 days before the public hearing.
And also, the public hearing has to be published 30 days before the actual meeting date.
And we have to have the report available to the public in case anybody wants to see the calculations or anything like that.
Let me back this up. So we need to. So
Board, can I make another comment, please?
I'm sorry, say again.
Board, could I make another comment, please?
Oh, of course you can.
Again, from at least council's perspective, my perspective, the gentleman mentioned the $25,000 on the far right corner there for New Braunfels, but you look at our $1,100, I guess we haven't updated it in about 20 years, Gary, is that correct?
That's correct.
And I think everybody on the board here realizes the almost catastrophic effect that has had in the last 10 plus 15 years, whatever, that we should have probably looked at increasing those impact fees and where it's left us from a budget perspective. I mean, that is a huge, huge hole to fill. And thank the board and this young lady for her presentation. We need to address this and get this handled because that's coming out of everybody's pocket right now, this shortfall for probably over a decade in impact fees. So thank you for letting me comment. I appreciate that. But that is a stark difference of what we're charging today, and I don't think we've landed on where we should be. But I think 1,100 is pretty low. So very good information. Thank you, everybody, and thanks for letting me comment, board.
Sure.
Thank you, sir. So it's got to go in the paper by June 12th.
June 12th, because we won't have had the city council meeting yet to establish that date.
So when are we going to go to council to ask for them?
June 20th.
Well, if it has to be published 30 days in advance, that doesn't give us time. Because I have to have it the way the newspaper, unless they start letting us use the Corpus Christi Caller Times. I know we're looking at that because they publish every day. But our newspaper, you get it into them this week by noon Thursday. It doesn't come out until next week on Thursday.
Okay.
So it's horrible. It's a horrible schedule of publications.
Yeah, you need some. What's the council meeting before the 20th?
Would be the council in the meetings in June are the 10th and the 24th. So if we got it to council by the 10th, then I could get it to the paper on the 12th, and it'll come out on the 19th, which I don't think is enough time.
That could work. I'm wondering if that was supposed to be the 10th instead of.
Actually, that would work because the 4 weeks is the 17th. Yes, that would work. So if we get it to council on the 10th and they do the resolution, then I could get it to the paper by the 12th and it'll publish on the 19th, and that'll be your 30 days.
Yes. Yeah, we'll change that to the 10th. I think that's a good plan because
Okay.
the report will still be available. We just have to make sure that by the time we publish that the report is available. And since it's after the 6th, we can make sure that works.
So we'll give our report on the 10th also. Is that right?
Yeah, we were talking, I don't know if that was the full presentation, or we'll just have a little write-up that goes along with that. I think either way could work, and then we'll do the full presentation at the public hearing, similar to this presentation.
Okay,
So-
it'll be a small one on the 10th with P and Z's recommendation. Okay, but you'll send me something to put on the council meeting.
Yes, I can do that. Mhm.
Thank you. Yeah, I was
Very good.
concerned about those dates. I'm like,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, yes, thank you very much. Any questions come up,
6:10
please
will be
reach
the
out.
council meeting, but they'll do the resolution for the public hearing.
Do we have a motion to adjourn?
No motion to
You will. Imagine that. Do we have a second?
Thank you so
I'll
much,
second.
Stephanie.
A second.
Josh seconds.
All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Motion
That's at 6:53.
adjourned. Whatever.